Hello and welcome to Being Crisis Prepared, the business continuity podcast from Embroy Crisis Management, brought to you today on the 21st of April 2020. I'm conscious as we speak that the world is focused very much on COVID-19, and obviously there are hundreds of webinars out there and podcasts talking about this very topic for you to choose from. And therefore, today we wish to speak and look at something linked, but looking at the long-term threats and opportunities that COVID brings for us as a society and the world at large, and the opportunity to think big rather than worry too much about the contact battle, as you may have called it in my army days. I'm joined for this podcast by two of my Embroy colleagues. For the first time by our operations manager, David Payne, and someone who has joined me on many of these podcasts, our senior consultant, Toby Ingram. So, David, Toby, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Matthew. Good afternoon, Toby.
Good afternoon to the team. Good afternoon to everybody.
Toby, conscious that you've had a chance to have a think about some of these long-term impacts and where they now sit, what they might look like. Is there something that is screaming at you that presents itself as an opportunity, perhaps before we start looking at any threats?
Well, there is something screaming at me. It's Mrs. Ingram, who's fed up with having me in the house. But apart from that, first of all, good morning to everybody, good afternoon to everybody again. And I would like to stress that our first thoughts are with anybody who has suffered a bereavement due to COVID or has friends or relatives who contracted the disease. It's horrible, and our sympathies go out to you. Where I'd like to start the podcast today is to highlight the fact that Mother Nature has pressed a huge reset button, and the really smart organizations, national, local, private, will already be thinking about how they can leverage that reset button to exit COVID lockdown in a better state than they went in. One of the good examples that we've seen recently is major international sports. And if we understand that a major international sport, any major international sport is first and foremost an athletic entertainment industry, that gives you a clue to their mindset, because it's hugely competitive, and they are always looking for either the best way to compete with their competitors for the entertainment dollar, i.e. gain more viewers, or within the sports, the teams are constantly looking for a 1% advantage. So they tend to automatically think, how can we make this work for us? Two examples at the moment: World Rugby. Bill Beaumont, the chairman of the IRB, has come out and said, look, we've been wrestling with a global season for 10 years now. Everybody knows it's a good idea, but we just haven't been able to unpick enough of what exists already to get it going. Well, now this is the opportunity. Let's do it. Let's sort the finances out and balance them, eliminate the club versus country conflict, and make sure that the IRB is not just the old guard. Let's expand the game globally properly. Eddie Jones was in The Guardian this morning saying that the international calendar has evolved into a higgledy-piggledy mess, and now this is the opportunity to make sure it isn't. And there's all sorts of issues bound up there with player welfare, fatigue, etc., etc. And Dave Brailsford of Team Ineos, formerly Team Sky, and formerly director of GB Cycling, he famous for marginal gains, talks about the international cycling season being spread out further over the year, so that it's not so heavily reliant on sponsorship and money from the four major events, particularly the Tour de France. But if you spread the load and you spread the benefits, you're by nature much more resilient. You don't have everything crammed into one really high profile, really fragile event. So the sports example is how it is certainly worth thinking along those lines. Whilst none of us like COVID or coronavirus, there are opportunities in there, and any organisation would do well to start thinking along those lines. So with that introduction, I had a look at rubbish and recycling, and a quick comparison gives me the following data. The UK sends 50% of its waste to landfill. Sweden sends 1%, and that 1% includes the ash created from burning some of their non-toxic waste, so it's effectively fertilizer. We export some of our rubbish to Sweden for recycling, and we incinerate or recycle the remainder here. And individual local authorities determine the collection policies. Because they're judged on volume, they often prioritise the recycling of high volume waste rather than perhaps the waste which is best to recycle. Sweden burn or recycle waste and contribute to national energy in doing so. They have a huge public campaign called Miljoner Vanlig, translates as millions of small acts, to stop plastic waste entering the waste stream in the first place. Thousands of recycling stations all over the country, none of which are more than 300 metres from a residential area. Recycled material used in construction, and their waste management is so efficient that they import waste, some of it from the UK, which they are paid to accept to keep their workers and their plants busy. Now, my point is, obviously, because of what Sweden have done, that technology is readily available. Our rubbish recycling is, in inverted commas, rubbish. Look at the figures, 50% to landfill. So with money now being much more readily available because the government is prepared to borrow almost limitless amounts, if you look at the example of rubbish recycling, now is the opportunity to significantly and very quickly upgrade our entire rubbish and recycling regime so that we reduce our environmental footprint, we protect the planet, we become healthier, we're a better nation for it. And this opportunity offered by Mother Nature's reset button, I don't think is going to occur again in our lifetimes, or an opportunity of this magnitude. So in summary, yes, I get that COVID is terrible and lots of people are struggling, but there are opportunities here, and not just for individuals and small companies. There are national opportunities here for us to get significantly better very quickly.
The Sweden example, obviously, Sweden is the shining light to hold up. Perhaps in this example, may not be the only shining light to hold up, but it's a stark contrast, isn't it? 1% Sweden, 50% in the UK, especially at a time when the world is crying out for better management of waste. It seems logical. Downsides, are there any in that example that spring to mind? I don't think there are.
Well, no downsides if you can achieve it. The challenge is the culture change. So to get single-use plastic eradicated from ever even getting into the waste chain is a big challenge. And altering people's behaviours, as always, is a huge challenge. But I do sense that the national mood now is accepting of major change, because I think we've had a bit of a scare. So I think it's worth trying at the very least.
Yeah, and it is that idea of it's a time for change, and the idea that the world, your money is limitless. I think that in my mind is the challenge. Is clearly money isn't limitless, and at some stage someone has to pay for it. And it's one of my bugbears of. Everyone says how fantastic the grey pound, and all three of us on this podcast, heaven forbid, are middle-aged. Let's be kind to ourselves. So the idea of the sort of the grey pound and the baby booming generation, or our parents type generation, never had it so good because they had the opportunity to buy houses, the denationalisation of free in inverted commas shares, etc., etc. Massive growth of the economy. Now, who is it that can't buy a house? Oh, it's our children that can't buy a house because they can't afford it. And what are we doing? We're giving them this massive burden of debt on top of the debt that they've all got from leaving college because back in the day of education. I think it was the Labour Party quote, which is a fantastic thing to strive to, but it comes with a price. So all our generation of under 30, shall we say, is left with £50,000 plus of personal debt, and now we're giving them billions of pounds of national debt. So what's an extra couple of billion? Well, arguably not very much, but equally arguably it's a couple of billion. David, what are your thoughts?
I agree, and I was going to echo that exact point actually. That I think the public attitude and public appetite, certainly public appetite for change, is there. Public attitude, I think that the COVID, exactly as Toby has pointed out, that the COVID has stimulated that appetite for change. But I equally agree that hanging a financial noose around future generations' necks is not something that we need to be very, very careful of. And echo your point about not wanting to create a problem for the future. And I think that as we step out of this, there's going to be a lot of people who are recovering and wanting to pay for that recovery somehow. And maybe the appetite for investment in alternative technologies might not necessarily be there yet. I would be very interested to see how Sweden funded it, because obviously there will have been a financial investment at some point in this new technology, maybe even to develop it in the first place. So I'd be interested to see what their taxation limits are, et cetera, et cetera. But I do know, and I think it's probably quite an interesting point, is that the Nordic states, and Sweden being one of them, are classed as the happiest countries in the world. Where they're all just environmentally friendly. So, yeah.
Interestingly, David, the Scandinavian states, the general rule of thumb is the taxation rates are much higher, but you get a lot more for it. And obviously, people are culturally accustomed to that, and therefore they don't protest about it. That may not be the way ahead for the UK, but I do feel that if you are going to take on a lot more debt, at least get something very, very worthwhile and something enduring for it.
I agree. But I suspect, and I am playing to a certain extent devil's advocate here, that we're already going to be taking on a lot of debt. I'm all for environmental change and reducing plastics in the oceans, et cetera, and certainly reducing that 50% landfill. I think that's essential. But in the early stages of coming out of COVID, then we may be in a position of wanting to try to do something that's possibly less financially, puts less of a financial burden on, noting that may be phase 2 in a multi-phase step. Changing public attitudes initially could be the way forward. It's just a thought, and I am playing devil's advocate to what you're saying.
Yeah, but with that in mind, David, I know you've looked at, Toby's written blogs on it, but I know that you've studied it as well, the idea of food and the challenge that we have currently with food self-sufficiency. And I know we've all, around the world, I think, seen the challenges of, was it Project Fear? I don't know. But when we talk about lockdown, suddenly everyone raced out to go and stock up their freezers, or even buy a chest freezer because you wanted to make sure that you and your loved ones were okay. But we've equally got the challenge at the moment of, I think I heard that a statistic that approximately half of the food that the working population consume during a day is not at home. Well, because you might have breakfast on the go, you have lunch at work, you go out for a meal. So on average, it's about 50%. Well, suddenly it's 100% we're now eating at home, and therefore obviously supermarket requirements go through the roof, which brings you back to the idea of, right, how much of that is being imported? And when the global supply chains pause, as they have done, what's the so what of that moment? What do you think, David?
I absolutely agree with you. And just to answer your question of how much of that is imported, the answer is nearly 50% of it. We are, within the UK, we are pretty much just over 50% self-sufficient, which means that we are importing huge amounts. And linked into Toby's piece about the environmental footprint and the carbon footprint of importing all that and use of fossil fuels, et cetera, then I think that now we have got a massive opportunity. And I think people are realizing that we have an opportunity, that we can raise our self-sufficiency. And looking at it from a resilience perspective, we can increase our sort of food resilience and our sort of food security, both of which slightly different terms in terms of that food security, and can we continue to supply our sufficient amounts of food to meet our requirements? And then that food resilience side of things, which is, are we able to bounce back from any sort of threat? And I think that we're now dipping our toe in the water of both of those. I mean, my wife is a gardener, and she has been gardening all the time, and she's been out.
To be fair, she's also a GP.
And she's also a GP, yes. So she does use gardening.
She's a GP. Yeah.
She's a GP, yes. But she is a gardener in her spare time to de-stress. And when she goes out, she's been trying to plant things like tomatoes and seeds and all the rest of it, and she can't buy them for love nor money, because I think everybody at the moment is out ordering online, trying to dig up their tulips or whatever, and are potentially going back into what we saw maybe in the 1940s of planting potatoes and things. And I think that speaking to a lot of friends, they are doing exactly the same thing. So I would like to think that people are seeing now the benefits not only to food and self-sufficiency, but health benefits of getting outside into the garden. And I would really, really like to see that spread from an individual level and grow, supporting local farms, supporting local shops. And I know the supermarket's done a cracking job, but I also speak to a lot of people. And I live in a small town in the borders, and more and more people are trying to support the local butchers, the sort of local agriculture, and they're doing really well. Before this, they sold, speaking to a local butcher, they sold 6 weeks worth of supply in 3 days. It was like Christmas for them, and they sold out of all the chicken breasts and all the other things, but they could replenish those stocks from the UK. So it's been great for us, and if that can spread even more to a national level or to a regional or even a national level, and we could get DEFRA and we could get other people on board to help promote UK agriculture, to help try to make UK agriculture sustainable, then I think that's a massive, massive opportunity for us. But we do have that age-old problem of how do we make our prices competitive. I'm not going to get into subsidies and all the rest of it because that is subject to a completely separate discussion. But there are issues that I think that the government will need to address.
Okay, a lot covered there. Toby, appreciate you've studied this area as well. What do you think about agriculture and self-sufficiency?
I love it. I love the fact that Larry is a gardening practitioner, as in a GP. I think that's terrific. But and I think that a government will be tempted to allow individuals, small communities, to do this on their own and then congratulate them and possibly claim credit for it. I think the government has to play a seriously active role here with rebuilding the local small farm agriculture, which gives the UK much better food resilience and much fewer food miles. And they should be offering tax breaks to companies that sponsor gardening clubs on their own company real estate, because if you can allow some of your workforce an hour off per day, 2 hours off per day, 10 hours off a week to do some gardening on the company allotment and send people home with homegrown vegetables, it's great for teamwork, it's great for mental health, it's great for food resilience, and it gets people in the right frame of mind. And companies will do that if they're offered a realistic tax break for doing so. And my point is I haven't really seen any local or national government discussing these ideas in public yet. They may well be doing it, but most of them seem to be focused on what's the latest death toll today and where are all the face masks. And those are important, but you have to think ahead and think, how can we increase our resilience and do so permanently and sensibly? And it comes back to Dave Brailsford and his 1% gains, which is the strapline for his success with the Sky cycling team. I think there are a lot of national marginal gains that we could do here. Rubbish is one and food is one. I can't wait. Yeah, all for it.
And it struck me the other day, I was conscious of Joe Wicks being the PE teacher for online social media, young, vibrant, energetic, appealing to the right demographic. Equally, on the cooking side, you get the likes of, I think it's Joe Munro, about to start on BBC, doing cooking for what's in your cupboard. Young, energetic, and appealing to that demographic. And again, the likes of Gardener's World, Alan Titchmarsh, Monty Don. yes, fantastic for you and I in our 50s to watch and go, oh yeah, well, good old Monty, I remember. Yeah, well, if you want to spread this again, you need to appeal to the right demographic. So finding the 20-year-old to go on Gardener's World talking about these things, creating that vibe that it's okay to have an allotment. You don't have to be retired, and in your shed is also your pigeon fanciers weekly or whatever. It can be okay. It can be cool to actually grow your own stuff and enjoy that. So no, it would be interesting to see where that goes. Sorry, yes, David.
I was just going to contribute to that as well. One of my tasks, and we've been trying to get rid of the long list of jobs that we've been given by our wives while we've all been in lockdown. One of my tasks was to build my gardening practitioner wife some raised beds, which I have done most of. I need to get probably doing a bit more of it. But my daughter, while she's been here, has also now been taking an interest in it. So I think that if we can get them out and get the younger generation involved they can see what they're growing. They can eat what they're growing. They blow the soil off, wash the soil off a carrot and eat it raw. And now my daughter is very, very keen on it. She goes out every day. She is quite happy to go out there and explain to me exactly what root vegetables she's got. She's got brassicas in here. She's even talking about rotations, and she's 9. So if we can use this opportunity now while people are at home to be able to increase that awareness amongst the young generation, then maybe we can do something for the future. Toby, do you have anything else on to that?
Just in response to Matthew's point, I've always thought it was cool to have an allotment, actually. I'm surprised that anybody would argue with that. But I would like to see now a social media influencer who has these vast audiences of young people do a series of gardening vlogs, etc., of, this is how you chit your potatoes before you grow them, etc., etc. I think there is the opportunity there.
Yeah, so thanks for that, David, on the subject of food and where we go to. But I think from a resilience business continuity, bringing it back to what we do and the nature of the podcast, the bottom line is that looking at how do we make ourselves more resilient, and the two examples you've quoted there are obviously you're looking at a community, and another topic that we've covered before in podcasts and in blogs is the nature of national infrastructure and the threats that poses. And before COVID hit us, obviously in February we were hit with floods, particularly around the River Severn, which is my home stomping ground. Is now the time, when we've released the lockdown and we are able to have people coming back to work, to say, okay, those companies that have gone bankrupt, all those people who are now looking for work, here is something that we can do with apprenticeships. We can do drive the idea of improving flood defences, looking at the likes of Whalley Bridge Dam. What is it that we need to do for the sake of, in inverted commas, I said it's a couple of £1 billion. Well, a couple of £1 billion is what the government is spending every day on furloughing. So if we can solve a series of major infrastructure problems for the equivalent of a couple of days, wouldn't that be a good investment? And then you are kick-starting people spending money because they've got money in their pockets because they're being employed. And it's the classic economic cycle. But it can only be kick-started at the right moment, because we don't want people, obviously, interacting too early, because then we just continue the spread and so on. So it's a balancing game. But I think there are so many projects out there, as you say, recycling, food, infrastructure. There's probably a whole thing about energy and wind farms and so on. Is that those core things that we as a country need? What can we do better so that we are more resilient, and so that business can thrive in that space that is created by a resilient country? That sounds a bit sort of soapbox-ish. I apologise, but sorry, Toby, what do you think?
No, I think we've identified some time ago that because of our history in the UK, national infrastructure is a risk, and the risk gets worse every year because the infrastructure gets older and older, and much of it is now over 100 years old. And you see exactly that at Toddbrook Reservoir and Whalley Bridge, that when a freak weather event happens, then they are more fragile than they would otherwise be. So I think you're absolutely right. There's a serious opportunity here that during lockdown, we can do the engineering assessments on the key bits of infrastructure and produce the plan for the upgrade. And as soon as it is safe to lift lockdown, we can kickstart some economic activity by starting to do those workovers, repair the bridges, repair the dams, etc., etc. In doing so, we will not only provide some much needed employment and activity, but we will make the country more resilient with every time we do that, so that we're not having to deploy RAF helicopters to drop sandbags into a dam in 3 years' time, because we didn't take the opportunity to fix it whilst we were in some form of enforced idleness. Over.
Yeah. Yep. No, and I know, Toby, you like your story to enhance a point, but I think I'm right in saying that back in the 19th century, when trains were first being introduced, they had two different gauges, a bit like, for those of us that remember sort of VHS and Betamax, and at one point they then decided, okay, we're going for what we've now got, the gauge that we now use. And in order to move from the London to Bristol line had to be changed to the new gauge.
That's right. Yeah,
that
I remember one.
Work that you would assume, I don't know, London to Bristol, off the top of my head, 100 miles. Nowadays, that would be major infrastructural work that would take months. It took them overnight to do it. Gangs of people lining up. You can imagine, everyone pick up the rail, move it 6 inches, nail it back down again. Thanks very much for coming. Job done overnight. And clearly, we are not talking of that sort of scale of speed of activity that you can do, because all sorts of improvements in health and safety and so on. But wouldn't it be nice if there was a way of mobilizing workforce through sensible employment, through a structured plan, to be able to deliver on some of these projects that enabled them to not be a bit like High Speed 2 that's talking to 2030, 2035 or whenever it is. But no, within 18 months, we will have solved the priority projects. And that way you are putting some real effort behind the financial health of the country, because you're paying people and then people spend and therefore they create wealth and taxes and so on, but also the mental health of our population, that we are contributing to the greater good in a worthwhile way. David, what do you think?
No, I agree, absolutely. And I think that what we're doing at the moment and what we've done over the last sort of half an hour or so is to highlight a number of different capital projects and things that we should be doing and how we could be investing our money. And I think from a resilient perspective, this puts it all into perspective, where we should be doing that analysis right now as to the list of the jobs that we should be doing and then putting a priority for it. So companies can do this for themselves, individuals can do it for their households, nations can do it. What have we learned? Where do we go forward? What lessons have we learned for the future? And where do we put our scarce resources? Because nobody's going to argue that they are scarce resources, finances. We have to be prioritising and investing in the best places. So, I mean, we've just identified that we can be spending $2 billion or so on dam protection. We've also been looking at environmental side of things and how do we reduce our 50% landfill. How do we increase our self-sufficiency and support agriculture, all of which costs money? Where are the priorities? And that's a really, really steep call and tough call for somebody to make. But the prioritisation, I think, is the key point.
Yeah, and I think you stick on top of that the social challenges of homelessness, mental health. There are lots of things out there, but in this mood of I read on I think it was a BBC Futures article, this idea it's not, we shouldn't be in a wartime mindset, because yes, we are fighting a virus, but actually we're looking for how do we develop a better society on the back of it, and seize those opportunities. And I think the article talked about it's almost anti-war, because we don't want to be doing warlike activities. We don't want to be huddling together in groups. We want to be looking for growth and opportunity rather than defence and introverted mindset. But I'm also conscious that that's half an hour of the podcast. which at this stage the dogs that people are listening, they're walking whilst they're listening to this, or the run that they're on is probably coming to an end, and therefore this is the time that we ought to be coming to an end as well. As we come to an end, for the listener, I would make you aware that if there's anything that you've disagreed with on this, of course, that's absolutely fine. Please do contact us at our email address, bcp@inveroy.com. In addition, the two of the team that were speaking today, David and Toby, David has had and is now recovered from COVID. Toby has had and is recovering from COVID. So I think as a company, we do have a perspective on what it's like. Therefore, I echo Toby's comments. We are so grateful for everything that the NHS does and the way that they support us. Long may that continue to be the case, and hopefully one day they will get the true recognition that they deserve as a matter of course, rather than just in the event of an emergency. But for all our listeners out there, thank you very much for your attention, and we look forward to speaking to you next time. One final piece, if you've liked this, please do let us know, because the only way we improve is through your feedback. Toby, anything final you want to say?
No, thank you very much. Great to do a podcast as always, and I wish everybody a very good week.
David, anything from you?
No, thanks very much indeed for the opportunity to join in. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, in which case, everybody, thanks very much. Thanks for listening. Look forward to the next time.